in trouble. All right, great. All right, I'm going to say thank you for reminding me, Tom. You're walking in and reminding me. All right, again, we're looking at the ornamental facade. This is the third of 3 classes, St. Thomas Church, Community in Stone, one of the treasures of St. Thomas. And so we're looking now, just to review those who are joining on the recording, at the rose window. And we had last week looked at how the drawings from the teens are different than what they carved in the 60s. And this is one of the examples of the things that they carved differently. What was in the spandrels? In this case, we have a person, a man with a band around his long hair. We have a lion, which looks very stern, and a bunch of scrolls as well around him, and a 5-pointed star. It looks like the lion is in. Go down here. And you'll see the head of an eagle and another 5-pointed star with scrolls around him. And you go over here and you see, looks like an ox with another kind of 5-pointed circle with scrolls around. So it's important to know the imagery of scrolls, which sounds like it's a written images of writing, even though the Gospels, which this is what they represent, the Gospels were codexes, likely, bound leaves of paper, but the scrolls evokes the Gospels. Let's go back and look and see what they had intended to be inside the spandrels long before. Here's the drawing. Let's look carefully. Oh, I'm going to omit somebody. Let's look carefully, and we'll see that, they had considered something a bit more traditional, where they had an angel with a halo holding a scroll. And then on the scroll is St. Matthew. And that's the typical image of the St. Matthew the Evangelist, an angel, a winged man. And then, look, here's St. Mark. And it's a winged lion with a halo around his head, holding a book, much more traditional. And you go down and you'll see St. John, an eagle, what looks like an eagle trying to hold a scroll with his wings. I don't know how an eagle would hold a scroll with his wings, but he's giving it his best. So here's St. John, and it's written St. John in there. And then you look over here, St. Luke, a winged bull with holding a scroll with his hoof. Do you see how his hoof is going over the book there? And what looks like it says, spandrels blocked for carving. You see that? So these would not have been carved for 50 years. This rose window would have been there, and whenever it was made, and it would have not been, just the block would have been clear or blank, and then these drawings were put in. So what I find so interesting about this, and we see this a little bit in some of the stained glass windows that we have. If you consider the difference between the drawing and then 50 years later, the carvings, again, designed by Canon West, the subdean of the cathedral for many years in the middle of the century, the carvings suggest that we know precisely what they're going to carve and precisely what these mean. There's no pressure by the designer, Barbarossa, or the carver Barbarossa, and the designer Canon West, to indicate, this is St. Matthew, this is St. Mark. And there's no pressure to show their wings. There's no pressure to kind of portray the imagery in a very traditional, standard way. They're actually trying to do something relatively new. They're kind of speaking in they're speaking in broad strokes. So they're trusting that you already know the imagery and that you would be able to instantly recognize it. They're not doing the work for you. Like I said before, look, I mean, you can't even tell that this is an angel. You would have to know. You can't even tell that this lion has wings. You can't, the eagle, of course, has wings, but he's not holding a little book. And over here is the ox, and no wings on that. So what I would say about this imagery, this use of the 4 evangelist symbols here in 62, is it is supremely confident. And also that it has a style that is, you know, a little bit modern, a little contemporary, you know, not quite Art Deco, a little bit of a step away from Art Deco, but using, you know, shapes in a non-realistic way. You know, it's not, this is a very stylized person. Oh, Kenneth, I see you have something to say.
Well, I just have a question, and maybe, I hope I didn't miss it. In the drawing, you pointed out the 5 stars around each, and maybe you're going to get to this. And in the drawing, it's a pure circle.
Yeah.
What is the significance of the 5 pointed? Maybe I missed that, and I'm sorry.
No, and you know, 5 in Christian imagery, it links back to the rose, I think, which has 5 petals, which signifies the 5 wounds of Christ. In his forehead, his hands, his hands and his feet. Let me admit.
Yeah.
Let me admit people. Okay. Okay. Well, there we go. But you know, that's what I would guess. You know, anytime you have the number 5, that's what that would mean.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So the contrast, and that was one of the most vivid of contrasts between the drawing and what we see. The drawing is so vague that it really allows the designer to fill in whatever they like for what's up here, for example. Shields blocked for carving, it says. Repeat the ornament here, and then it just has blank spaces for statues inside the archways. You look downward, we're going to look at the archway again, and you'll see that the archway, all of the little spaces are meant to have things in them, and these are numbered, but I can't find out what these numbers were. My suggestion, my consideration is that these numbers indicated there was a design for some statues to be in these particular places, but in all the other places that statues are appointed, there was no plan. Let's look at that area right now. It's immediately above. This is such a large spot. Here we go. All right. So what we have here is, and it's slightly different than what is portrayed in the drawing. It's a different shape. It's a different orientation. Right, front, and center. Who do we have here? We have Christ, who is holding the orb. He's holding the orb that symbolizes his governance over all of creation. Christ the King. He's in imperial robes. He's holding up his hand in a blessing. Yesterday we talked about how St. Thomas is holding his fingers in the same way, but holding them down. And Kenneth Cohen told me after the class that I thought it was an act of St. Thomas lifting up his hands in blessing. But Kenneth, which I think you're correct, said, no, it's like he's holding out his hands down to the people on the street in a blessing. He's actually directing his blessing to those who are below. In this case, Christ with a crown and an orb, which symbolizes his governance, and holding up his right hand in blessing, the orb of power, his kingship of the world, and here he is. Now, on either side of him, let's look closely. It's hard to see through this gauze, but we're going to have to try. At the left is the Virgin Mary, and it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell in this picture. Really is hard. I apologize, but evidently her heart is pierced, and she's looking up and is in a kind of anguish. And then on his right side is Saint John the Baptist. But it's really hard to see these folks because they're so small. Oh wait, I'm sorry. I see what I'm saying here. Here is Mary. My mistake.
Here's Mary here. Yeah.
There she is. There is Mary holding her heart as if it was pierced, looking up at him, looking up at her Lord. This happens the same in most root groups. Jesus is looked upon by Mary. And then on the other side, we have here John the Baptist. Hello, Father. Can I hold you? Can I hand you something?
This is for you to this.
think about this, the Dodge service. Where we're at for now. Thank you. So there's John the Baptist, and evidently he has a Maltese cross in the kind of books that I've been reading, but I just don't see it. I just don't see it anywhere. They said with a Maltese cross, and I couldn't find it. Now, John the Baptist, he's holding his stick, which is in the shape of a cross, which means, you know, it's a way that the imagery of John the Baptist is meant to look forward to Jesus, kind of a little nod to Christ, the cross. It's done much more elegantly in other, you know, pieces of art. And then he's holding a lamb, because he would say, "Behold the Lamb of God." Behold Jesus, the Lamb who was slain for us, imagery of Christ, Agnus Dei. So on either side of Christ the King, the largest figures are Mary, the Virgin Mary with her pierced heart, and John the Baptist with his Agnus Dei, with his Lamb of God, and the cross in his staff. Now, then below, there is a row of 6 smaller figures. Let's look closely. Hard to see through the gauze, but hopefully they will be moderately recognizable. I'm going to make sure to get this right. All right. The first one is St. Simon here. Oh, I moved it. Excuse me. The first one is St. Simon. The next one is St. Bartholomew. Oh, and look closely. St. Bartholomew is holding a knife because that was the gruesome manner of his death. He was flayed for his faith. And then you move past here, and then you will see St. Matthew. It looks like he's holding a hammer of some sort, and it's hard to tell. And it looks like he's holding a bag, a money bag. You see that? Because he was a tax collector, right? Kind of a pejorative thing to do, because he did I think he stepped away from that profession after, the resurrection, but there he is. Then you move on past, and then you see St. James the Less, and I think there's a saw right next to him. You see that there? Because he was sawed in two for his faith. Mm-hmm. And then next to him, see, is someone looking up, someone praying up, St. Jude. And then going past the larger John the Baptist, we have St. Matthias, the one who was elected to be a disciple in the place of Judas. All right, moving further out. Now, the people that I had confused with Mary and John the Baptist, on either side, which I think is really neat, this is intent on either side of Christ is Mary Magdalene. This is Mary Magdalene, who is really blurry here, and Martha. All right. So now I think this is extraordinary because it's a kind of a redemptive image. In the story of Mary and Martha, excuse me, I'm getting things confused. Mary Magdalene is not the one who is the sister to Martha, but Martha. So it's Mary Magdalene, which means she's from Magdalena. She was one of the disciples, followers of Christ, apostle to the apostles, because she was at the first inbreakings of the resurrection at the tomb, and Martha on the other side. But it was Martha. Which one was the one who was busied about by her many tasks? And who chose the better part? Martha. Did Martha choose the better part?
No, Mary chose.
Mary chose the better. So, this is kind of confused because Mary of Bethany is the one who chose the better part. And she's not up here. Mary Magdalene is. So you say you have Mary and Martha, completely the same. No, you don't. But I think it's something I haven't seen before. So to have Mary Magdalene and Martha on the other side. So if you look closely, there is another set of kind of like a, how can I put it? Kind of like a graphic novel or a sequence of images in a comic strip. There's 4 panels that are here. And all of them are about St. Thomas. Oh, there I go. All of them are about St. Thomas. You move down and you'll see this panel. Do you see that down there?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this is the first panel that represents St. Thomas's career. This is his despair. All right. It looks like what he's doing is he's holding his hands against his head. Can you see there? And two other people are with him. It looks like they're trying to comfort him. All right. And his despair, this is called the despair of St. Thomas. This is an allusion to what he says to Christ, let us go that we may die with him. All right. It's kind of like a self-description. The interpretation of this verse by the artist is that this is him in his despair. Well, I was interpreting it like he was committed to Christ, so much so that he would be willing to go to Jerusalem and die with him. I don't see that as necessarily despairing at all. Maybe despairing of the possibility that they're going to survive their ministry, but not despair with a capital D. Then you move along, and this panel is meant to be the doubt of St. Thomas. And the quote that's affixed to this in the notes that I found are, "Reach hither thy hand and thrust it into my side." Right? Now, this is the moment that's not portrayed on the high altar. The moment that's portrayed in the high altar is of St. Thomas saying, "My Lord and my God," kind of the St. Thomas convinced. But this is the moment where he's still doubting, and it looks like Christ is holding out his arms, asking him to come forward in his doubt. Then you move further along, and I hit the arrow again, excuse me. Okay. All right, let's go in. All right, here we go. St. Thomas confessing. St. Thomas convinced. This is St. Thomas actually touching the wound of Christ, which it doesn't actually say if he touches. I think he's offered to touch. But here he is touching, and it is him saying, "My Lord and my God." Let me let somebody in. And then the final of four panels that are, oh, look what I found. Oh, I found the Maltese Cross.
Oh,
that's what they meant. Oh, excuse me, everyone, but I don't mean to belabor this point. Look, the Maltese Cross is below Christ. I mean, below St. John the Baptist there. I was looking for it somewhere on his person. No, it wasn't. It's immediately above the door, underneath his area. And so I guess that the pierced heart must be on the other side. Ah, there it is. Do you see it there? Yeah. And let's look beneath Mary, Virgin Mary. And not only is her heart pierced in her person, there is a winged heart, which is being, pierced by a large sword. This is an allusion to the prophecy that Simeon had for her. A sword will pierce your heart as well. All right, sorry to get derailed, but I'm so delighted that I found something that I thought was missing. So I remind you, we had the despair of St. Thomas, the doubt of St. Thomas, the confession of St. Thomas, and then how do we close? Well, with a little bit out of the golden legend, which is, we don't know biblically what happened to St. Thomas, but in the legends, we know a lot about him, or we're told a lot about him. In some cases, he goes to Armenia, and in this case, the ministry of St. Thomas is him founding the Church of Mar Thomas in India. I believe it's on the western coast of India. He's said to have gone there, and the people there to this day, the Church of Mar Thomas, consider St. Thomas not only their patron, but their founding saint. He went there, he had his own gospel in his hand, ready to go, and he founded the church there.
Kerala.
In Kerala?
State of Kerala.
State of Kerala. Thank you, Tom. In India. So that is the picture that you go through every day. You come to this church. It's a lot of imagery all at once, but there it is. Now, last week, we looked carefully at the archways, the archways above and all the symbols there. But on either side of you, it's important to note, and let me make sure I have my proper notes next to me. I don't want to get these wrong. There we go. On either side of you in larger format are the other disciples that aren't portrayed in the archway. Who does that look like to you on the left? Peter. Peter, yes, he's holding the keys to the kingdom. Christos. I need to learn what that means. I know that Christos is Christ, but it could be anything. Thou art the Christ, or something along those lines. Who is the saint in the center? St. Andrew. Why do you say St. Andrew?
Andrew's cross.
Yes, he's got St. Andrew's cross. The legend goes that St. Andrew was crucified on an X rather than a cross, as we know it, where there's one of the pieces of wood are going up, one of the pieces of wood are going across. This is St. Andrew. And then, can anyone tell me who the one is? And I was going to show you what St. Andrew looks like in the reredos, but I'll do that later. Who is that on the right?
Would it be St. James the Great?
Absolutely, David. Absolutely. It's St. James the Great. And how do we know that? One of the ways we know that is because he's got his head covered. He often has his head covered because he's on the road. And he's got a little pouch on his staff. It's kind of a traveler's pouch. Maybe to hold a little snack or maybe to hold some money. But he's on the road. He's traveling. He's on a pilgrimage. He's often showed on a pilgrimage because the legend says that he made it all the way out to Spain. So that's a big deal for him. Now, I was going to show you, let's see. Here is what St. Andrew looks like in the reredos. He's on the far left. See there? He's holding the fish. Because he shows up in the story of one of the stories of the feeding of the loaves and fishes, the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. There's so many different versions. And let's go back. All right. So we see Peter and Andrew and St. James the Greater. These are much more large figures than the others that we were just looking at. Much more easy to see. But again, I remind you, this is from the 1960s. And you've got a more stylized presentation of these figures. These are not how human faces look. They're not quite, they're somewhere in between realism and Art Deco. I go over, let's see, I didn't want to look at all of these. There we go. All right, let's look closely and see who we see here. Who is on the left? Let's see, let's look closely. If people get a gold star if you guess who this is. Ooh, he's got a chalice. And that chalice has a snake, a viper, a poisonous.
Is it a doctor? Is it a doctor?
Into it.
A doctor?
It's well, it's not a doctor.
It's Moses.
It's Moses? That's a great thought because Moses held the snake up to protect people from poison, to protect his people from the poison, but it is not. It is John, all right? It is John who, it is said, the legend goes, no, not the legend, I mean, I think this is fair. He had a vision of a poison chalice that was being brought to him, of a snake coming out of the poison chalice. And so he realized that he should not drink that poison, and he survived the assassination attempt. He was the only disciple of the 12 to live to an old age. All the rest were martyred for some reason, in some way, in some gruesome form. Whether it was being thrown off the temple, sawed in two, flayed alive, crucified on an X, crucified upside down, you name it. It happened to them. But John survived to the end. It is said that he was brought on a pallet into the liturgies in his old age until the day he died, kind of processed in. So his image is the poison chalice being revealed to him as a snake in a chalice. The thing that not the implement of his martyrdom, but the implement of his almost martyrdom. you pull out a little bit. Let me pull out a little bit and look carefully at this person. Eroxoi kai ide. Interesting. Who do you think this is? Well, I'll tell you, it's Philip. It's Philip. Usually Philip is portrayed with a cross staff, which has 2 crosses on it. Let me see what happens in ours. Where is Philip for us? I could have sworn, here's Philip in the reredos here. Now look at this, much more realistic, portrayal, he's got a little bit of a scowl. They're trying to make it look like a real person, but his staff has 2 crosses on it. And this is because this is to symbolize his martyrdom. So he's a martyr, and he's also got the cross of Christ. He's also got the cross of his death on it. We'll zoom out. We'll go back to these 2, these 3. And this must be, I still need to figure out what this Greek alludes to Philip. I haven't figured that out yet. My apologies. We go over here, and this is one of the 12. No, excuse me, it is not one of the 12. Who do you think it is? But it's someone very important. He's got a sword. Paul. It's Paul. Absolutely. Thank you. Good job. There's another. He is often portrayed as bald or balding on the top with long hair coming down. And he's got the sword. Do you recall why he has a sword for his kind of symbol? What's that?
Cut the ear of the Roman soldier.
He cut the ear of the Roman soldier. Good guess, but no, it is not. That is not the reason. Paul was not at the Garden of Gethsemane. Paul was not on board with the Jesus movement while Jesus was alive. He ended up converting after Jesus was died and risen, and had an experience of the risen Christ on the road to Damascus, and then became, instead of organizing the executions of Christians, he became one of the greatest evangelists, and that's why we have a church today, is because of him. His sword is because he was a Roman citizen, and as a Roman citizen, if he had a capital crime, committed a capital crime, which in this case was his ministry, he was entitled to being killed in a very peaceful way compared to crucifixion, or a swift way. He was just had his head cut off in Rome. And so he's holding it because it's the sign of his martyrdom. And this is what happens in Christian imagery. The sign of martyrdom becomes a sign of glory, or a kind of trophy of their life well lived to the end. All right. So again, we have all these smaller figures above, and then a set of 3 saints on either side. Again, very powerful. I am told, someone told me, maybe it was Angel or someone else, that they used a kind of staining solution when these were carved in the 60s to make it match the stone behind it. So they would age kind of at the same rate. But they were bright white for a time. All right, before I move to the next part of the ornamental facade, up here, does anyone have any questions? I'm going to move through this very, very quickly, and I think I have time enough for another lecture sometime during the rest of this semester. We've got Father Schultz teaching a few classes. We've got Mother Lee Pei teaching a few classes. We've got a guest from General coming named Eliza Anderson, a new professor. But I might fit in the rest of this ornamental facade somewhere in October or November. Let's look very closely. You look above and look at these figures on either side. Well, first, let's discuss this rood group up here. You have Jesus being crucified, and on either side of him is one of these is Mary, and one of these is the beloved disciple John. It's hard for me to tell who. If I were to guess, it would be Mary on the left and the beloved disciple on the right. Reenacting the image, the time when Jesus said, "Behold your mother, behold your son." He finds, one of his disciples cares for his mother as if she were his own. So now she has a household. Now she can survive. Here he is being crucified. Again, very stylized, and it wasn't carved until the 60s. And do you see the secret symbols, the Greek letters, Alpha and Omega? It looks like the Omega looks like an M, but it's not. It looks like it's a result of the archway behind each letter. The A looks like an A, and the Omega almost looks like an M, but it's really an Omega. Meaning that Christ is the beginning and the end. This is the immortal moment. Upon all human history and sacred history, this moment, is the hinge point. And then more quickly than I would ever like, oh my goodness, lectures could be written about all of these figures that you see here. I could do a single class for each. So forgive me for going through these so quickly, but I just have to, because that's where we are. We have on the right here. Oh, and it's important to note that each one of these persons has a carved herald, ecclesiastical heraldry of them, above their heads. And this is either the herald of their household. This has the pallium on it. So this was an Archbishop of Canterbury. Edward the Confessor here has his shield beneath, but we haven't gotten to him yet. All right, let's start here with William Temple. This was an Anglican priest who served as Bishop of Manchester. He became Archbishop of York, and then a very famous Archbishop of Canterbury in the 40s. Extraordinary writer, extraordinary pillar of the church. And, this shows you that this was done in the 60s. Because if this had been carved during when it was built, he wouldn't have shown up on here. And then next we have John Mason Neal, who's dressed as a priest in the midst of his liturgy. This was a scholar, hymn writer. He was a big part of the Anglo-Catholic movement in the 19th century. He lived from 1818 to 1866. A big high churchman. He wrote Good King Wenceslas and a lot of other hymns that you would recognize. And he started the Society of St. Mark, SSM, the convent that Sister Pernice is a part of. Sister St. Margaret. Sister St. Margaret, thank you. He founded that, John Mason Neal. And then next to him is Bishop Lancelot Andrews. He goes back to the 1600s. And he held a high position in the Church of England during the reigns of Elizabeth I, James I, and he was one of the people who oversaw the translation of the King James Version of the Bible. Then you see next to him, Thomas Cranmer. Oh my gosh, you could go for days talking about this leader of the English Reformation, an Archbishop of Canterbury who served during the reigns of Henry VIII, Edward VI, and for a short time, Mary I, before he was killed by her. And he was a big part of the annulment of Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, and and he was martyred for his alliances and the things he did and the things he did left undone. And he fashioned the prayer book at its beginnings. And without him, we wouldn't really have Anglicanism. Then we have here St. Edward the Confessor, one of the last Anglo-Saxon English kings. Usually considered to be the last king of the House of Wessex. And he ruled from 1042 to 1066 and is a big part of Anglo-Catholic spirituality. And he's a saint. He's one of the only English kings, one of the few English kings to be made a saint, and was the patron saint of England for a really long time before St. George. And I'm moving very quickly just because of time. And then we move into the New York group, honoring of the New York diocese's legacy. This is Bishop Samuel Provoost. He was the first bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of New York. And, he was an extraordinary career. He was the rector of Trinity Church, Wall Street, before he became the first bishop of the Diocese of New York. Next to him is Bishop John Henry Hobart, the third Episcopal bishop of New York. He was, his career was in the early part of the 19th century. He founded General Theological Seminary, and he founded Geneva College, which became Hobart, and William Smith Colleges in New York and up in the Finger Lakes area. And he was a big part of Elizabeth Seton's life before she became Roman Catholic and then became a saint. Next to him is Bishop Henry Codman Potter. He was the 7th bishop of the Diocese of New York, Episcopal Diocese of New York, and an extraordinary statesman and figure in New York City. There's so much that could be said about him. He was very praised and appreciated in his day. The next to him is, and he was also can you see that now? Is it back? Yeah. And then finally, William B Huntington, rector of Grace Church, New York, and he had a hand in the genesis of the Chicago Lambeth Quadrilateral in 1870, which is a big hinge point upon which modern ecumenism stands. It's kind of a blueprint for Christians who have broken up with one another to get back together again.
Three-legged stool.
It's a quadrilateral, which includes Holy Scriptures, the creeds, the sacraments of baptism and Holy Communion, and the historic episcopate. The laying down of hands, the Holy Spirit lineage all the way from Christ and the disciples. All right. I think we're at a stopping point, but you can see that this is an extraordinary set of symbols, which is, I see it as a kind of invitation to understand your history. If these are names that you're unfamiliar with, boy, should you know about them. And, you understand the architecture, the skeleton, the sinews of how we got to be who we are. And they take seriously recent history. I think it would be an extraordinary circumstance if we were to make a statue at St. Thomas. I mean, they were making statues of people who lived in the 1940s when this was being made in the 1960s. Can you imagine making a statue in the front of St. Thomas Church of someone who lived, in the 2000s, or 2001, 2002? That's the kind of encouragement that they were giving to those who had supported them very recently. I'm going to spotlight this from everyone. All right. Yes, Michael.
On that point, are you aware of spots where, say, that could be done?
There are 2 spots remaining on the bell tower. And are there others? I need to look closely.
I'm just curious, like things that were blanked, like
yes, they're called niches. They're called ornamental niches, and then there are 2 niches left on the bell tower. I understand. I will look closely and see. But there's opportunities. I think there's a niche on the most northernmost door. But, we haven't filled it yet.
It's like in the 60s, everything pretty much got more or less completed.
Yeah, I would say 95% of it got completed after a big bequest from George S. Scott. So, talked about it in the first class. All right, so everyone, is 10:45. If I have the time over the course of this semester, I'll be giving one more class on all the bits and bobs that I have not covered today. There's the bridal door, and there's some other doors that have some beautiful ornamentation on them. And I would like to show them to you and share them. So thank you all for joining me, and all the very best.
Thank you.